Welcome back to the fourth and final panel of this conference, Art, the Sacred, and the Common Good. It is a beautiful day in Princeton. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for being here online. I'm now delighted to hand it over to the moderator of our fourth panel, Timothy O'Malley from the McGrath Institute for Church Life at the University of Notre Dame, one of our co-sponsors of this great event. And the final panel is on beauty in the curriculum, educating for artistic creativity and appreciation of beauty. Thank you, Tim.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this last panel. I know that there's some, perhaps, tiredness and exhaustion, and we promise to increase that as much as possible. Again, I'm Tim O'Malley. I work at the McGrath Institute for Church Life at the University of Notre Dame. I teach in the Department of Theology, in liturgical sacramental theology. I work in Catholic education, and also teach in marriage, family sorts of things. We hope, particularly speaking on the topic of education, which I know has implicitly come up during each of the panels, formation, education, to try to engage in a little bit more of a dialogue amongst each other. And so I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves, where they come from, and then we'll get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's been such a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Margarita for the invitation to speak. My name is Elizabeth Corey, and I am at Baylor University. I teach in the honors program, and I also teach political science classes and also great text classes. My background is in political philosophy, but some other things as well, which I may talk about over the course of this panel, though I won't give you the full list today. I tend to teach undergraduates almost wholly. My position is in the Honors College, which is an entirely undergraduate institution. And we're doing something I would venture to say very special at the Baylor Honors College. We are more or less a small college within a larger university, and our aim is to immerse students in exactly the kind of learning that I think everyone here values implicitly or explicitly. So I'll say more about that as we go.
Thanks, and thank you, Margarita. Thank you, Scala. Thank you to all the co-sponsors. I'm Jonathan Pidluzny. Right now, I'm Vice President of Academic Affairs at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. So ACTA has been around for 26 years. We work on the 3 A's, so academic accountability, academic freedom, and academic excellence. And so one of the major projects that I lead is an annual assessment of 1,135 core curriculum or core curricula at American colleges and universities. And so we're basically looking to see whether the schools are maintaining a strong commitment to traditional arts and sciences disciplines. So there are only 24 A schools, including Baylor. And things aren't necessarily getting better. If we look at the last 3 years, in just the last 3 cycles, exactly 50 universities have eliminated literature or foreign language requirements, and those are the ones that are sort of on the chopping block most frequently. Prior to joining ACTA, I taught political science, political philosophy really in American politics for 10 years, and so my background is also in political philosophy. My research area was actually what makes democracies work the way we want them to work, right? So where you have the rule of law, where you have sort of gentle interactions among citizens, where you have expert impartial administration, representation, due process rights. And my answer actually was that culture matters a great deal. And so I've spent some time thinking about what built the democratic culture that has for 250 years, with some fits and starts, led to a good politics in the United States.
Well, great. So let's get started. Again, as we've seen throughout, the theme of our gathering is linked to beauty, worship, and the common good. So we want to start with the question, why do you think beauty and worship alike matter in an educational setting at all? What's really at stake? I suppose I'm asking what's at stake for this whole event that we're doing in the first place. What's at stake in your assessment?
Well, I'll begin by saying this is actually picking up on a lunch conversation we had today, which was that there's a way of thinking about beauty, I'll bracket the worship part for just a moment, but there's a way of thinking about beauty as something that is sort of extra in curricula across the levels from elementary to middle school to high school, all the way up to college. And so that we all know that if a school is likely to cut some kind of education, it's usually arts. You don't need an orchestra to be at this school. You can let that go. No, we don't need choir. And that is all true, but I think that's a very constrained way of thinking about beauty in the curriculum. And so the way I would start to answer that question and to bring worship back in is that I think with Joseph Pieper, who everyone here, it's funny, I was looking at Joseph, some secondary work on Pieper, and they said they called him an obscure German philosopher. And I laughed at that because I thought, well, perhaps to some he is, but he's certainly not obscure to this crowd. And I know you all know the book Leisure Basis of Culture, but in there I'm very much persuaded by his distinction between ratio and intellectus, which will be familiar to so many of you. Ratio being the kind of knowledge that is intentional, that is it's deductive knowledge. You're reasoning from premises to get to an end. It's very much purpose-driven. And then he compares that to this other form of knowing, intellectus, which is receptive. It's a kind of passivity in the most beneficial way, being able to receive the world essentially through our consciousness. And he says, well, you all know what he says. He says this is not much valued in the present day, and I certainly think it is not much at all valued in contemporary college education. What is valued? Well, we all know this very well. It is either utilitarian ends, career, most of all, or it is something like political activism. I mean, why do you go to college? Well, you learn how to be an activist, or you can learn how to get a really good job. Pieper rejects both of those things, as we know. He rejects the world of total work. He rejects the idea of people as functionaries. And that is a very countercultural view in the modern world. And I think coming to terms with, the notion of leisure, of course, is intimately related to this. But all of this has something to do with beauty. So I started by saying, beauty, is it just arts classes? Is it just orchestras and choir? Well, no, I think there's a way of thinking about beauty that can saturate the whole curriculum so that you can find beauty in a computer science class. I have a student who makes a very strong case that computer science is a liberal art, if understood properly. And I can tell you more about what he says. It's very interesting. But I think with him that there's a way of thinking about all of the curriculum as potentially open to a certain kind of beauty. Now, does that beauty look the same across all parts of the curriculum? No, of course not. The beauty that you can apprehend in an art history class is very different from the kind of beauty that you'd see in math or that you would see in literature and so on. But I think Pieper prepares the way for us to say we can be receptive, we can be appreciative in a way that is very much undervalued in the modern world. And I think without that disposition of appreciation, of love, and of receptivity, I kind of wonder how different we are as colleges from vocational schools.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, right, that it should suffuse the whole curriculum. This question was so big that I actually wrote out my answer. And so I'm going to be the outlier, and I'll give you those 5 minutes. Yeah, what's at stake? I think a lot, right? The first is human happiness. I mean, human beings are the only creatures who want more out of life than all the pleasures that we can stuff into 70 or 80 years. And so the true, the good, and the beautiful, they're worth pursuing because they help satisfying the longings that are distinct to free and rational creatures. And I think the pursuits help us. They help to improve us, rather, by realizing the higher attributes of our nature. But doing these things, refining one's understanding of what's good for a human being, pursuing wisdom, and learning to appreciate beauty, these are all difficult, they're hard. Actually, David made this point in a very vivid way this morning when he explained his experience of listening to Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. That wouldn't be mine, right? And it's because I don't know enough, right? I haven't learned how to appreciate it. I mean, I can appreciate Bach's, cello solos. They're easier, right? And so once upon a time, universities understood themselves to be places that should provide that kind of mentorship, mixed in with some concern for the useful things. And so these should be the learning objectives that inform the entire curriculum. For most people, the 4 years spent on campus will be the best opportunity they have to develop the tastes and habits of mind that will prepare them to continue that pursuit for the rest of their lives. As one wise university president remarked, and I wish I could remember who, college is a time to furnish the mind. Make the most of it because you'll be living there for the next 50 or 60 years. Second, beauty is not only an intrinsic good, or maybe an intrinsic good, as David put it this morning, it can also be used as a pedagogical tool in service of other goods, including truth and goodness. That's because beauty excites a sentimental or passionate reaction that opens the soul to learning. Stendhal captured the psychology this way. He said, "I was in a sort of ecstasy from the idea of being in Florence, close to the great men whose tombs I'd seen, absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty. I reached the point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul. I had palpitations of the heart, I walked with the fear of falling," and he goes on for a while. Campuses are beautiful places, some of the most beautiful in the United States. Most of those who go to a college will never again in their lives spend such a large proportion of their time in such a beautiful environment. The sentiments induced by beauty, the beauty of a campus or a cathedral, makes it feel almost inappropriate to think small or base thoughts. In this way, aesthetic environment can create a receptivity to learning that educators can use to teach about truth and goodness. I think this is also one of the reasons public monuments and grand public architecture are both important. The point of the Lincoln Memorial or the statue to John Witherspoon not far from here, or even statues of Robert E. Lee are not to provoke unthinking admiration. The idea is to produce a common experience of awe and even the awareness that countless citizens or students over the years and centuries have shared it. As President Harding put it at the dedication to the Lincoln Memorial, "This memorial, matchless tribute that it is less for Abraham Lincoln than for those of us today and for those who will follow after," end quote. It's an awe-inspiring place for common reflection about the war, where Americans come together across generations to reflect on the gratitude owed to Lincoln and the connection between his statesmanship and the freedom we enjoy today. Quoting Harding again, "This memorial edifice is a noble tribute, gratefully bestowed, and in its offering is the reverent heart of America. In its dedication is the consciousness of reverence and gratitude beautifully expressed." So tearing down statues on campuses today is not a small thing because it obliterates a kind of civic connection that they're designed to forge. And then this gets me to a third point, and a shorter one, even though it may be just as important. Democratic society requires some degree of common purpose and understanding. At the risk of inciting frustrations, 1945 Harvard, can I quote Harvard faculty here? A 1945 Harvard faculty report arguing for core courses in the American democracy and Western civilization put it this way: "Democracy, however much by ensuring the right to differ it may foster difference, particularly in a technological age which further encourages division and faction, and hence difference in outlook, yet depends equally on the binding ties of common standards. It probably depends more heavily on these items than does any other society, any other kind of society, precisely because the divisive forces within it are so strong." Right? This actually comes after a long meditation on Machiavelli's discourses on Livy. So universities should be repositories and perpetuators of our civilizational inheritance. That's what's at stake. And I think if every college person, educated person, shared a basic familiarity with the ideas that make up our civilization and political regime, theology, literature, philosophy, history, I think it would be easier to have reasonable and civil public dialogue.
Thanks for both of those answers, which linked up, I think, particularly to colleges and universities and the work that we do in them. I often think about my own experience working at a college and university. I teach also primarily undergraduates. I teach a big course on the sacrament of marriage. I have 265 undergrads across Notre Dame every fall, and it's one of the things I've seen over 10 years of teaching is how angst-ridden they are today. They're full of anxiety. COVID has doubled, tripled, quadrupled this anxiety, this worshiping of grades. And so I often think, really it is a worship, right? James K. Smith notes that everybody worships something. There's no escaping it, and so did Augustine. But in my sense is they have come to worship achievement. And it's not their fault. It's kind of actually our fault because we train them in school. I had a colleague who pulled his daughter out of kindergarten during the pandemic, and as they pulled them out of what was a really excellent public school in our area, they gave them a huge binder of assessments. She's in kindergarten. And they said, "Well, how did you get all these assessments?" And they're like, "Well, we assess them once a week." They hired a full-time person to assess this 7-year-old. right? When I think back of my own kindergarten days, if they assessed me, they would have found much lacking. And yet, sort of this is what this kindergarten student was being initiated into, a culture of assessment, of reward, of idolatry. So my question for us is, you know, in some ways we have to fight this, right? I mean, that's why we're here. I don't think anyone in this room is like, oh, I want more assessments. They should do it 12 times a week. But how, in your own sort of experience of teaching, of encounters with beauty, have you learned another way, I suppose, is a way of thinking about it? How have you learned another way? You can be personal here and describe how you found another alternative way of approaching education.
There are several ways I might begin to answer that question. Let me just comment with and agree with you that this cult of achievement it seems to be increasing every single year. I don't know about the others of you in this room who teach in universities, but we constantly field questions from not so much the students, but their parents about whether or not the money they invest in an education, which will total, if they were to pay the sticker price, which almost nobody does, but if they were to, it would be something like $250,000. And they say, well, look, I'm laying out this investment. I darn well hope that my child will come out with a good career prospect of some kind. And so why on earth would you want that? Why on earth should my child take classes that are not directly geared toward that utilitarian outcome? I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't remember that having quite this pressure on me as a young college student. It wasn't this way. It wasn't this career focused. So I'm not quite sure. Well, I have some ideas about what may have changed, but that's another conversation. I do feel like the pressure toward achievement is absolutely corrupting to the idea of liberal learning. Margarita and I have talked about this at length, and it's a problem that's not easily going away, though, because you wonder as a teacher, just as you said, are you contributing to this? I mean, we in colleges say we want you to be excellent. We want you to be the best you can be. We want to have you win a prestigious scholarship. All this stuff we tell them. And then we wonder why they're full of anxiety and why they're so just sort of paralyzed with self-doubt. I think it's imperative upon us, and this gets back to Margarita's original comments about mental health. I mean, it is imperative for us as teachers to say there's another way of living. Doesn't mean they're not going to go to work and they're not going to have careers, but there's another way of living that is actually, and here's Pieper again, is more leisured. That there is and leisure, of course, as we all know, is not a break from work. It's not just like when you go to the theme park or you watch TV or something. It's this whole different mode, and this relates to the early morning panel of a kind of aesthetic contemplation, which is not the most natural thing for human beings, especially not adult human beings. Those of you who have children will know that children are great at this. They will stop, doesn't matter how late you are, for school or work or anything, and they will see a snail on the ground. And all they want to do is sit and look at the snail and watch the way it goes across the rocks. And isn't that great, Mom? They are naturally contemplative. But for us who are bound up in the world of total work, we can't stop to do that. We're too busy. But I think nevertheless, liberal education is supposed to be that kind of a break. It's supposed to offer that kind of leisure. And if we don't model it for them, they're going to get it nowhere else, because most of the university doesn't do this kind of education. And we have to not only model it, but we have to justify it by showing them how satisfying it can be. It's not an immediate satisfaction. It's not the fun of watching a movie or doing anything that's easy and just amusing. But it is nevertheless, I think, that's our burden. I don't think I even answered your question. But the achievement piece of this is very crucial.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I can engage it directly either, although I think you did, better than I am about to. But I think a big part of it is how busy faculty have become, right? And so even people who are teaching the liberal arts, and ultimately, I mean, I taught for 10 years, and most of my life was administration, right? I was running political science, I was the faculty regent, I ran all day long, and I had 10 minutes to prepare for class, which was the only part of my job that I really enjoyed, right? And And so I try to be sort of keenly aware of how closely students watch and how much they learn from what you model. And I didn't actually think about that, right? About the fact that I wasn't making time to sort of live what we were trying to talk about. And so I think that's a problem. But I think once students get to a college or university campus, they've been watching this for years, right? If, you know, that's been the story of their life, not just because their parents are probably, you know, busy professionals, but also because they had to go to ballet, and they also had to go to soccer, and they played baseball, and, you know, there's had to be some martial art in there as well. And they did all of this to get into a good college, right? So, right, to build up the CV that would impress someone on an admissions committee, right? And so I think that is a huge problem. We're not modeling what we're talking about. When it comes to how students are different and sort of very obsessed with achievement, the two things that sort of stand out for me are helicopter parenting, right? The idea that kids don't get to kind of be free-range play kids anymore, and just learn what pain feels like, right? And fail a little bit, right? And get teased a little bit, right? I mean, you know, bullying is not good, but I think that we do need to make people anti-fragile, right? I think students today get to campus and they're very fragile. And so it becomes very hard to give them bad grades or to give them honest feedback, because that makes my life really hard, right? Because then they're going to come to my office and they're going to be crying, and I just don't deal with that very well, right? And so I think we need to do better about that. And then I think it also connects to the cult of self-esteem, right? Where you know, there was this idea, I mean, I don't know how popular it is today, but when I was growing up, it was pretty popular, that self-esteem is the cause of excellence, as opposed to excellence being the cause of self-esteem. So if we just make everyone feel good, then maybe that will sort of translate into better outcomes, right? And so I think that's still with us today, right? This idea that you know, people will do better if we give them better accolades.
Yeah, I remember I had a Polish professor who, I was a terrible writer. I went to a very small public school in East Tennessee, and I was not prepared for college in the least. And so when I arrived, I was bad at everything. And I remember she pulled me in. She smoked in her office all the time, and she taught sort of communism, history of communism, not a how-to guide or anything, but I remember she told me, "You're terrible at this." And I was like, yeah, that's clear to me too. We share that in common, that knowledge. And I remember this moment, but she said something that was the other side of that, right? Was, but I'm gonna help you get better, right? Which took time. It meant that she had to skip committee meetings. And incidentally, she didn't get tenure out of all of this, right? She probably changed my life more than many other professors that I encountered, and yet she also didn't get tenure and was sort of erased. So there's something about like this taking time. How do you all do that? I mean, how do you assess like that taking time and creating cultures that are against this, even though you're up against it? Whether you teach college or in a lot of settings, high school, right? There's always some administrative meeting you have to go to. How do you do that? How do you fight the system?
I don't usually think of myself as a revolutionary, but there is something, there is an aspect of what you're asking, which you make sacrifices. I think you make sacrifices. I mean, there's, as everybody knows, there's enormous pressure in universities to be publishing at very high levels in very prestigious journals, with all your citations counted and all this stuff that goes on, and I don't think that is I sort of think that's a bad thing. But it's bad insofar as it does prevent many people from saying, I want to take the time with this individual person, this young soul. This will take time away from the publishing or the writing that I might otherwise be doing. I think you have to try to come to some middle position where you recognize that the work you're doing with the individual students is the more important, but do the things you have to do to maintain your job. I think also, though, as Christians, I mean, those of us who are Christian college teachers, you didn't get into this to become famous, or you shouldn't have gotten into this to become famous or to be someone that everyone is talking about. It is not, your work is not about that. Your work is about forming the souls of those you come into contact with, taking the time with them sitting and talking with them, asking them about their reading, asking them about their writing, walking through their papers with them one sentence at a time. I mean, this is the duty of a college professor. But if you're somebody who does that, then you may have to sacrifice in other areas. I think it's a simple opportunity cost. But I think the clarity that comes when you recognize here is what I'm really supposed to be doing, this is what's important, makes it a little bit better to say, you know, I may not be the path-breaking scholar in my field that other people would want.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I think that with very few exceptions, universities are or aspire to be hedge funds welded to multinational corporations, welded to think tanks that are trying to change the world, and they teach a few courses to keep tax-exempt status, right? And the people who lead institutions and set the mission of the institution think very little about curriculum, with very few exceptions, right? And there are some exceptions, and they are like the Honors College at Baylor, Thomas Aquinas College. I mean, we know the exceptions, Wyoming Catholic University. There are a few dozen exceptional institutions in the country, but the rest are either what I described or they're aspiring to be what I described. Administrators run literally multi-billion-dollar corporations, and they give faculty just enough freedom, right, to sort of do their own little thing in their discipline, live the life of a dilettante, which really is quite fun. You know, and it's a great gig, right? But I think all too often we forget that we're supposed to be sort of curing an education for people who haven't had one yet, or who haven't had a post-secondary education yet.
So to return to a question that we were kind of hinting at, but I asked poorly, so we'll get to ask it again, is where did you learn to value beauty in your education? You know, concretely, when did that happen for you?
That's a really hard question. I mean, it's hard. I suspect if any of you tried to answer that question for yourselves, you'd have to think, well, was it one thing? Was it multiple things? I think that there's a way in which, when we're talking about beauty, we also have to broaden it out to talk about moral and intellectual beauty. I mean, I know that's implicit in this whole conference. But if I had to choose one example of that, it would be, it wasn't an aesthetic beauty, but it was a relationship I cultivated with a mentor as a very young person. He was a teacher who was not technically my teacher, but we struck up a relationship, and he would sit across the room from me, and we would read things together, and we would talk about them, and we would do that very often. And this is my model for a kind of mentorship or an investment in students. But I saw in his approach to the intellectual life a real moral and intellectual beauty that I wanted. And that it was that spark of, oh, someone lives this way. This is very odd. This person is not concerned with status. This person is not concerned with money. This person is not concerned with material goods. He's concerned with a life of the mind. And to me, that was an awakening. It was just, well, if that's true, then why isn't everybody doing this? But I think the reason everybody's not doing this is they haven't been shown it, and they haven't been shown it through the concrete experience of having someone invest time and interest and energy in them. So that was my first sort of vision of real moral and intellectual beauty.
Well, you made my answer easy because the same. I actually had my most important intellectual mentor, Heidi Studer, who came from the sort of University of Toronto tradition, an incredibly modest woman. She wore T-shirts to class, but I never met a professor who spent more time crafting lectures or more time with students. And so, I mean, this was Canada, and so the drinking age was 18, and there were bars on campus. But she'd go out with us after class, and we'd spend hours talking until the bar closed down, right? And so she modeled that kind of investment of time. And when I sort of thought about this question, and the answer that I would give, my thinking was actually, I grew up in a Ukrainian Orthodox church that was so traditional that everything was in Ukrainian. And my parents made the utilitarian decision that I should go to a French school and not a Ukrainian school, which meant that I had really no access to what was happening. And still, it was such a beautiful, it was a beautiful church, there was incense, iconography, choir, everything was sung. it was so beautiful that it was impossible to think small thoughts sitting there, even if I couldn't understand what was being said. And so you try to participate by sort of thinking about the things that you think you should be thinking about. Right? And I even remember as a fairly young child thinking, this is where I spend the most time thinking about those who are less fortunate, what our duties are, what it means to be good and virtuous. And so I really think that there is something about that kind of aesthetic experience that opens your soul to bigger thinking, because you should be embarrassed to have small thoughts or low or base thoughts in that kind of an environment.
Thanks, Jonathan. I actually, I share that in common with you. I grew up in East Tennessee, and we would all, every year, our youth group, breaking the mold of like having lots of lights and loud guitars and things like that, we would go to a monastery for a week to study. In retrospect, I don't know how they thought this was going to work, but it actually did work. And we would study, but it was really the experience of studying, but more importantly of waking up at 6 a.m. with the monks and praying with them, that suddenly you recognized that there was something more to life than the life that we had sort of constructed in our own educational settings, right? So we had looked very small, and I think the first time I was introduced to the possibility that philosophy and theology is something you can study, right? Growing up in a public school setting, I didn't know what it was. I knew that sometimes they called on, the Baptists would ask me to speak about Catholic things, but that was it. And so it was this transformation, this sort of encounter with beauty that raised expectations. Were you going to say something about this, Elizabeth? Okay, you just looked excited, so I wanted to, for those watching at home, there was a moment of excitement. Okay, so I wanted to offer that. But if not, how do you then start to teach like this in the classroom? Are there practices you recommend, things that you've adopted that allows for this kind of education to unfold?
I'll answer that, but I also wanted to say something else.
Good.
I think the number one practice, okay, if we're talking about how do you make this work in the classroom, you slow down. There's an enormous pressure on everybody to get through the material. And sometimes that's explicit, a lot of times it's not. But if you're in a class, I love this class, but I will tell you, it's the ancient Western tradition of great books that I teach. And we start with Homer. We read a trilogy. We read the Oresteia, then we read Plato's Republic. Then we turn to Aristotle's Ethics, Virgil's Aeneid, and we end with Augustine's Confessions in one semester. And so I've just started not doing all that. Because it's not good for the students. I mean, if you rush through the Republic at 3 books a day, they're going to take nothing away from it. Same with Aristotle, same with all of these writers. So I think some of it is, and I won't get in trouble for it, so it's fine. But I think some of it is just slow down. Approach what you're doing as a kind of, as almost a kind of prayer. I mean, obviously there's going to be humor, there's going to be laughing, there's going to be informal conversation. It's not prayer per se. But it's a making your classroom a kind of sacred space where you just say, okay, for these 50 minutes or hour and 15, we're going to stop and we're going to talk about this text. I've chosen it because it's a good text, and we kind of contemplate it. We enter into this mode of contemplation, and I think to do that, I mean, I suppose in some cases you would be punished for not getting through all the material, but to the extent you can do that, I think that's a wonderful way of just showing students, okay, you can take a break. You can get off the treadmill of achievement for just a moment, and you can enjoy this for its own sake. I wanted to read just a short quote from Jacques Maritain's Education at the Crossroads, which I think is really to the point here. And it's in a footnote even. And he says, look, he doesn't say look. He says, that's not Maritain. He says, I purposely stress this element of delight in the grasping of beauty, for delight pertains to the very essence of beauty. Unless we delight in and are moved by a work of art, we may thoroughly discuss and analyze it, but we shall never understand it. And he goes on and he goes on. In reality, the delight transmitted by beauty thrills not only the senses, but also, and first of all, the intuitiveness of intelligence and spirit. And of intelligence and spirit. It goes on in this vein for some time. I think our job as teachers in the classroom is to try. We can't do it by design, but to try to spark that feeling of delight in the students, that this is fun, this is delightful. And we can only do that if we slow down and don't see it as a mode of getting them ready for an assessment or any of these other terrible learning outcomes we have to be aware of.
Yeah, so one small thing that we started doing near the end of the time I was at the university is we started doing our public lectures in the library atrium, which was the most beautiful place probably on the entire campus, and it gave the students who organized the events, they became proud of the beauty of the lecture, right? And so, like, I could see that they became prideful about beauty, and I think that's a good thing. It also just made for a really enjoyable event, right? And more people would come to the events that were in the atrium than in a sort of shabby classroom. So I think that's one thing. One thing that I stole from a colleague who's just a tremendous educator. He would actually make his students curate beautiful images to have up on the screen when they walked into class, right? And so he didn't necessarily do the work, and there's always something if you're teaching the great books. So he didn't even necessarily do the work. He assigned to the students, find something beautiful, that will complement this particular lesson or this particular book. And then sometimes he even asked them to explain why they chose the particular item that they chose. So that's another small thing, I think. I think maybe the most important thing, though, is just to model seriousness about the true, the good, and the beautiful. I think it's really easy to underestimate how much what we do matters to students, right? And so I think the way we talk about weighty things, even if they're not the subject of the course, I think that really does make an impression as well.
Thanks for both those responses, to slow down and to create an environment, a space where those encounters are unfolding, and to speak weighty things. One of the things I've noticed, particularly when my students, and Jonathan, I'd love to hear your reaction to this as someone who does sort of curriculum analysis, is when you actually ask them to encounter art, they're because I think the initial danger of a bad teacher, which I have been in my past, was to have them encounter art and then just see what happens. But there's actually a kind of preparation that needs to take place. The intuitive response of, I find, a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old is to try to not to notice something, but to try to figure out what it means, right? So they often get things entirely wrong because they haven't attended to what's there. So I've been inspired by Montessori approaches to education, so I'll often have my students spend 75 minutes in our church on campus, and I don't let them pick up like literature. This stained glass window means that. I say, no, nothing. You bring your own book and to write in, and that's it. If you want to write poetry or whatever, but I want you to just look for 75 minutes. And actually, at the time after 75 minutes of looking, they're at last ready to do anything. Right? It takes time to look, right? To see, to behold. It's entirely wasteful, and I think my colleagues think that I just don't want to teach that day, which is true. Of course, I'm giving life lessons, but it does take time, and so that's one of the practices I've adopted. I know you've done a lot of work in assessing fine arts curricula at these institutions, right? No. Okay, I thought this were going to say. Well, great. That's what. Yeah, because we talked about it. That's why I think it. So.
So I guess the first thing I want to say is I know nothing about how to teach art appreciation, but I do think that that beauty does really open the soul and makes people receptive, and maybe in a way it sort of like it kind of separates us from our amour propre for a moment, so that we're not worried about ourselves, right? When we're when we're in the presence of beauty. So I think it has immense pedagogic utility. I would love to know how to teach appreciation. I'd love to know more about how to appreciate art myself. Right. So that's not something I can speak to. What I was mentioning though was that every year we assess 1,100 universities, a little more than that. And we look at what's taught, what's been added, what's been removed. In the past, we've taken a very, very quick look at fine arts. So is there a distribution category that requires students to take a fine arts course? Not something that we've ever published. This summer, though, we're gonna take a much deeper look at the extent to which fine arts is a part of the core curriculum and how universities are approaching it. So I don't have answers yet, but once we've put in all of this time over the summer, I think we'll have a nice stack of materials to start assessing, and a number, right? I mean, what proportion of universities actually do this? So for literature, 30.6% of the universities that we look at, and it's almost all of the universities that offer a BA in a traditional arts and science discipline. 30.6% require what we would call a literature course, right? I mean, it's about 13% for foreign language, and so I think that the number is going to be much lower actually for fine arts, but don't know quite yet. So that's coming. That'll come this fall. We're also actually looking at philosophy, theology, Western civilization, and European history. Not necessarily to include in our annual publication, but to kind of get a sense of how things have changed.
Can I try to answer?
Please.
Or just speak to what you mentioned? I have the opportunity, because Baylor's Honors College is broad and very diverse. We have two courses, one of which David Corey teaches, called Great Texts and Music, and one of which I teach called Great Texts and Art, because I did a degree in art history after college. There's a real challenge in teaching art and beauty, because there are a number of challenges. For one thing, a lot of students just don't see it as worth their time. They're like, yeah, art, yeah, I can go to a museum, it's fine, I like it well enough. Somebody's groaning over there. It is entirely optional, but for those who do opt in, there's a kind of clearing away process that has to happen first, which is that we are so unbelievably saturated with images. I mean, if you think about how many images we could see in an hour on our phone, it might be more than a medieval person would have seen in a lifetime. I mean, it is remarkable, and we've seen all the great art. We see it, mocked. We see it used in magazine advertisements. We see it all over the place. To look at Botticelli, to look at the Mona Lisa. I mean, it's just like we've already done that. So there's this enormous task of clearing away the idea that, oh, I've already seen that, or I saw that in a museum once. You have to, again, it's a kind of process of slowing down and saying, yeah, you think you've seen that, but you have no idea what you're looking at. I think the same could be said about music. I mean, we're saturated with music. We hear music everywhere we go. But to hear music, in the elevator at the hotel is very different from intentionally sitting down and listening to a great work. And I will say I'm partial to classical music, but so a Bach prelude and fugue. I mean, until you kind of know what you're listening for, it just seems, oh, that's classical music. That's all you need to know. Well, no. There's both a clearing away of the idea that I have already heard everything and seen everything, and then there's a clearing, and then there's a building up of, yes, there's a tradition here, and let me start by having you listen carefully and at leisure to these things, or look at leisure. And that is so hard to do in this age. And I do believe that's different from 30 years ago, because we immediately think we know everything because we can look it up on our phone. But that's a real challenge, I think, to teaching about beauty and art. That the students come in thinking, I've seen that already.
Is there a particular work or piece that you find fruitful when you're teaching, when they wake up, when they see? Is there like something you're just always surprised, like this wakes them up out of their slumber?
No, I think it's different for each person. I do find, and I've written about this just a little bit, it is not necessarily the pieces that you think you'll like in advance that end up moving you. I took a class as a senior in college. It was called Northern Baroque Art, and we spent weeks on the art of Rubens. And I went in saying, I hate Rubens. Rubens it's too much, it's too busy. I don't like the body types. I mean, it's just too much. But in that class, the teacher transformed me. He was able to say, yes, this is beautiful, and here's why. He didn't say this is beautiful. He just said, look at this. here's what's going on, here's what Rubens is doing, here's his wife. It's not just a woman, it's his wife, here's his child. And so as we went through this, I grew to love the art of Rubens. I still do. But if you look at Rubens in a museum, he doesn't appeal to modern sensibilities. So that was just my example of it, but others find it in, Impressionism or ancient Greek statuary or whatever it is. It's just that something catches them is what I think is most important, not that one thing does.
I mean, I can't speak with that level of specificity, but the point that sort of jumped, that I've noticed recently is, I don't think that we have an existential crisis in the sense that people aren't attracted to beauty. Right, and I think actually looking at social media shows this, right? I mean, and it's an insight that I think comes from some of my staff who have forced me to look at TikTok and Instagram as we think about ways to use them to educate the college-going community on the importance of a core curriculum, liberal arts, et cetera. But people spend an awful lot of time trying to create beautiful Instagram feeds. Now, sometimes it's tied in with self-conception and borderline narcissistic or completely narcissistic portrayals of themselves, but it isn't always, right? I mean, and so people, they take joy in putting beautiful things into the world, and I think that's even true of TikTok, and there's been some writing recently about trends of just sort of like curating these beautiful short videos on TikTok that young people are doing for themselves. Right, so I think that there really is an opportunity, right, to be seized here because it's a longing that's not being satisfied by our general culture.
No, that's well said. Yeah, no, it's ironic. I offered during one of these we did a fake J term at Notre Dame during COVID. We never did a J term, but they felt guilty because we just sent students home for a month and a half to their parents' basements, and so we wanted to offer them something. And so I taught like a 3-credit course on theology, worship, and beauty, and there were 75 students who were in it, but there were over 125 students interested in it, precisely because in what they said, some of them said, well, we're in it because this is a great way to get 3 credits in a very short period of time, and that was honest and true. But some said, like, well, I've always wanted this, but there's no one has offered it to me. It wasn't a sense of, well, I don't like beauty, I don't want to read literature, I don't want to know. There's almost a felt guilt, like I actually would like to if somebody would offer it to me. And so there was all this interest in it. Do you find that in your teaching too?
Yes, except that at Baylor, there is increasingly a culture of young people who kind of find that cool. To admit that they want that. It's a little bit like embracing just the whole geekiness of being an academic. And I think, but I think to the degree that certain places encourage that, and it's not, we don't, of course they don't think it's geeky, they just think it's really interesting because their friend over here took this class and told them it was good, and then they, I mean, the culture kind of builds up sort of one by one, and it's lucky when that happens. I don't know that you can design that from the top down.
Yeah, so I think maybe a similar point. We know that humanities disciplines are being shut down all over the country, and English and history enrollments are collapsing. But when there's a talented professor teaching one of these courses, they fill up. Right, and so I mean, this is anecdotal, but we know people, or we all have friends at universities around the country who sort of teach in this tradition, and their classes are full, and they have tons of undergraduate research fellows, and there's no shortage of master's students who are interested in being mentored. I mean, the problem is that the humanities and the liberal arts are committing suicide, right, by becoming political, right, by politicizing themselves and taking on a social justice mission, right? If you keep politics out of the classroom and actually focus on the true, the good, and the beautiful, and how these texts or how these works of art help us to experience and learn about these things, I don't think there's any shortage of interest.
So since we're the last panel of the day, if we'll take a step back, I've heard many things, and we're just going to take the prerogative since we're the last, we can do whatever we want, and it's one of the gifts of being the end. Is there something, based on around our topic of education, beauty, the common good, and particularly us on this question of curriculum and education, that you heard today that you think is important as we consider this topic as we move in? A sort of summation of all that we've heard. I know Margarita will offer that very soon herself, but since we have about 10 minutes left here.
I guess it's my turn to go first. So I think that the beautiful can be morally or sort of ethically questionable in a way that by definition the good and the true and pursuing the good and the true isn't. And this I think this came up in the first panel and then again in the third panel, right? That beauty can be used in bad ways, right? To make vice appealing, sort of, or to tempt, or to inspire people to terrible political projects, right? And so beauty has an intrinsic goodness, I think, because of the sentimental. Listen to me sound like a romantic, because of its sort of sentimental consequences for us. But I think that it also has to be or can be guided in a political community, and where it is, that's a good thing, right? And so what comes to my mind when I make this point sort of almost immediately is my experience teaching Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, which I've taught twice, and both times it was a disaster. And it was a disaster because the theoretical materialists in the class liked the guy, right? I mean, you're supposed to find, it's supposed to be a horrifying portrait of, of what it means to live like a theoretical materialist. At least, that's my read on it. But they were kind of cheerful about it, and they kind of relished this idea that like 1 gram of their own fat is worth, the lives of, to them, should be worth the lives of, everyone around them. And so I guess, so the power of beauty and art means that it can, so the students in this particular case were actually high school students who do their entire high school on a university campus, so they do their last 3 years. And they're sort of elite STEM students who are like, the best of the best in the state. And so and then I was teaching it in a kind of science ethics course. So I guess I had to ask myself, as part of my responsibility as an educator, to find better texts for them. So for, I think like Tolstoy's Confessions would be a much better text that, next time around. So coming back to the original point, I think in a commercial democracy like ours, where we have sort of almost deliberately distracted people from thinking about death, right? I mean, Montesquieu makes this argument that to reduce religious fanaticism, you want to give people wealth, abundance, and stability, so that they don't think about the questions that sort of lead to religious fanaticism. And so I think that we've built that, right? We've built a place that distracts people from thinking about their mortality, distracts them from these big questions. And I think under those conditions, to finally get to the point, I think that an opening or even a chasm can kind of emerge between what kinds of beauty are valued and true and the good, right? The things that our mortality reminds us to think about, right? And so I think that we have to think about what it looks like to try to close that chasm, right? So I guess that's something that that the first and the third panel really kind of got me thinking about.
I want to emphasize what I think is maybe a kind of takeaway from this entire day, which is the idea that I'll just put it this way, to appreciate beauty means you've got to appreciate. You've got to, again, it's this ratio intellectus distinction. You can't go out and say, I'm really going to look at beauty today and I'm really going to appreciate it in a kind of intentional way that makes it into an object. You have to cultivate, I believe, a kind of appreciative attitude, a disposition to be grateful for what is there, and and a willingness to look around at what's there to be seen and appreciated. Pieper again has this wonderful line: man can take nothing something having to do. I've botched it, but he can't receive gifts. That's the ultimate That's the ultimate takeaway. We don't know how to receive a gift, and that's really true. I was talking about this in class with my students the other day. I said, have you ever, been ill and received a dinner from somebody and felt at once, this is so nice and I'm so thankful, but now I owe you? Yikes, I'd much rather be the person delivering the dinner than the one receiving it. And Pieper is so good at saying, actually, the most important things are gifts. I mean, obviously, the grace of God is a gift. And I think to the extent that we can cultivate in ourselves a disposition to appreciate and to receive unearned gifts, that's a tremendous benefit. I also think that that's a wonderful way of understanding modern conservatism. I mean, I think this is not the subject of this day, but I think modern conservatism is doing itself a real disservice by emphasizing all the things that are wrong with the world and the things we need to change and fix. Whereas, I mean, to me, the essence of conservatism is a kind of gratitude. And to the extent that that's gratitude for beauty, I think that's something that we can take away and put into practice in our own lives.
Thanks to both of you. If I might just wrap us up and then hand it over to Margarita. One of the things that I heard many times over is the difficulty of festivity, of keeping the feast in late modern life. And it can kind of be debilitating because, right, while I have some control over some things, I can't sort of end, like, I haven't yet found a way to shut Facebook down or end the technocratic regime yet. On the other hand, one of the things I think in conversations outside of the official sessions I had was that in a lot of ways, all of us in this room are involved in like creating, to be prophets of possibilities, of alternative realities of cultures that create spaces of possibility in a world, that those often small grow over time and create movements. And so sometimes I have to remember that I don't need to fix, for example, the totality of Catholic higher education tomorrow, of which no one has hired me to do. But that I actually do have an array of spaces where I can do this, and that I have freedom to act, right? That there's freedom then in keeping this feast in these spaces. And so, we began last night by reminding ourselves, at least in an initial talk, that we needed to be both optimistic and pessimistic, but I suppose I'm somewhat optimistic that there's so many people creating these spaces throughout the US and that working together we can do this. So on that note, there's nothing left to do but to thank our two panelists and turn it back over.
Thank you. It has been a great pleasure to have all of you here today. I do not want to keep you long. I will just make a few brief comments. Someone asked me just a minute ago, what do I think I'll take away from this day? Well, just a few things I want you to ponder. One, I was really struck when we heard earlier that one thing I often hear people say is, well, people can't really agree on what's beautiful. And I heard someone here say today, no, actually, many panelists said, there's a lot of agreement on what's beautiful. And frankly, if we can't identify things that we all think is beautiful, on what are we going to base our shared loves and our friendships and our life in common? So this question about beauty is really urgent. Second, I would say, and we just heard this, I think beautifully said, beauty leads to gratitude. It's very easy to look at everything that's wrong, and there's a time and a place for that. But one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this topic is precisely that I have seen exposing students to the philosophy and theology of beauty, showing them great art, taking them someplace to experience beautiful music, leads to gratitude. And gratitude is the foundation of friendship, and it's the foundation of building a life in common. So I would just say, I want to now just, in gratitude, thank everyone once again who made today possible. This event really could not have been possible without the very hard work that went into organizing this, putting on the technology. Trey has been back there live streaming this. This is our first live stream event. It's reached hundreds more people. We're going to cut the videos and put it up. I'm really grateful to Joanna for her beautiful icons, for her beautiful catering, the cake that she baked when I told her to buy the cookies and she baked a cake instead. Just that touch of personal beauty that she brought to this event, to my collaborators at Scala, Bill Gonch, Henry Burt, Kyle, everyone who's was labored to make this possible. I really also, just as I said this morning, felt strongly about doing this because I felt that for so long neglecting beauty in my own education, in my own life, was a sin of omission. And I think that beauty in nature, beauty in beautiful music, beauty in the architecture of this campus is waiting for us to appreciate it. I will end by saying, oh, I did hear a rumor, if you want to hear some beautiful music by Paul Jernberg, I heard it will actually be performed at a church about an hour from Princeton, St. John's, and Allentown tomorrow while Paul's still in town. If you're visiting from out of town, we have beautiful churches right here in Princeton. We have had people today with us from Nassau Presbyterian, All Saints Episcopal, Trinity Episcopal. There's many beautiful places of worship right here in town for those of you staying overnight. For those of you looking to go out to eat, Princeton is something of a tourist spot, so I would say go now and good luck. And finally, I will say that all of the work that Scala has done since 2016 to try to restore classical liberal arts education and return beauty to our schools, our places of worship, and our culture wouldn't have been possible without the by now close to 200 people who have taken money out of their hard-earned pockets to donate to support activities such as this. So my last request for you is that on your way out, I have left an evaluation. If you could please write a few words about how you heard about this, what it means to you, what are you going to do with this event? It's really going to help me thank the people who made this possible. And next to that, you will see a card which explains to you a little bit about Scala's mission and how you can support these kinds of activities, our forthcoming book, and future work. I ask you to just take with you prayerfully those cards and consider whether or not you are able to join the couple of hundred people over the years who, through many small donations, make these kinds of events possible. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.